Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. The title I have given this sermon is A New Life and a Day Without Fear. And I want to begin by sharing with you where this phrase came from and how I use it in my personal life. You might want to adopt it for yourself, though I have to warn you, you have to be careful with it. First of all, how I use it. When I'm out shopping or eating out, as the transaction comes to an end, the person selling to me or waiting on me will often ask, is there anything else you would like? Is there anything else I can get for you? And if the situation is right, I will pause, look thoughtful, and say, yes, I'd like a new life and a day without fear. Now, as far as lines go that get people out of their usual way of thinking, out of the trance-like state that most of us live in much of the time, that's about as good a line as I know. I'd like a new life and a day without fear. Wouldn't we all? That's one of the answers I've gotten. I wish I'd kept them all over the years. I wish that line were original with me. It isn't. I got it from a movie that came out in 1971, and I have been using that line ever since. The movie holds the record for having the longest title of any movie that has ever been nominated for an Academy Award. The movie is Who is Harry Kellerman, and why is he saying those terrible things about me? The movie stars Dustin Hoffman. It also features Jack Warden, who I think does an outstanding job. Dustin Hoffman plays the part of a character known as Georgie Soloway. Soloway is a rich, successful man who seemingly has everything, but he begins to think he's losing his mind because the women he dates reject him after getting calls from a mysterious character named Harry Kellerman. He consults a psychiatrist played by Jack Warden, and clearly some of their meetings are hallucinations. In one of the encounters, Georgie is coming down the stairway in his very posh, he's very wealthy, very posh Manhattan apartment. And there, emerging from the fireplace, is Santa Claus with a huge bag of gifts. And when Santa turns around, we learn it's not Santa at all. It is Soloway's psychiatrist simply dressed in a Santa suit. Santa asks Soloway, what do you want for Christmas? And Soloway protests, this cannot be happening. It's August after all. And he says to Santa, this is crazy. You're not Santa, and this isn't Christmas. But the Jack Warden character says, Georgie, I know crazy, and it's not me. It's you. What do you want for Christmas? And Soloway thinks for a good while and says, I want a new life and a day without fear. And given his life experience and the unrelenting disappointment he has experienced in his life, even though he's very successful, this request makes perfect sense. I want a new life and a day without fear. And the psychiatrist responds, oh, Georgie, I got you a choo-choo train. Happy New Year. What we all want is a new life and a day without fear. You've kept up with the headlines from last year, right? All we got was something like a choo-choo train, like many a child's long wished-for Christmas toy broken within a few days. Or step back from the headlines and look at your personal life or that of a loved one. Things aren't always coming up roses. Just days after Christmas, I got word that a friend of mine who had as brilliant an encyclopedic mind of anyone I have ever known had died of glioblastoma, the meanest, most aggressive kind of brain cancer there is. So how do we, gathered here on this first Sunday of a calendar year, basking in the afterglow of the Christmas story, go forward confidently with the lives Jesus came to show us and to live them without fear. Now, answering that question is what the rest of this sermon is about, and it is my desire to give you something or some things that you can take from here to build a new life and a day without fear with. Now, there's likely no one in our culture who doesn't know something about Jesus. The Jesus they know about, however, is the Jesus presented in our culture's true religion, which is consumerism. And the highest holy day of this religion is commercial Christmas. And commercial Christmas gives people a distorted understanding of the real Jesus. The real Jesus did not remain an innocent babe lying in a manger that graces our Christmas cards. He was a subversive sage, a social prophet, a movement founder who invited those who heard his message and responded to it into the same relationship he had with God his Father and into a community whose social vision was shaped by the core value of compassion. And that relationship of love and that practice of compassion is what leads us into a new life and a day without fear, both radically redefined by Jesus. So let's look at that. You know, the Jesus story is a wonderful story. I love it. Most of the biblical tradition that we have is carried by stories. Our lectionary readings for today are all parts of stories that our ancestors told that gave them identity and courage. If you think about it, just 500 years ago, people didn't think of the Bible as doctrines to believe or as Jesus as someone to believe in. They experienced the Bible as stories to inhabit and Jesus as a companion in daily life, not someone to believe in. And they got this through stories that were transmitted to them through stained glass, in hymns, in sermons, in rituals, in the calendar that we borrowed from Judaism that became the Christian liturgical year. You know, religious laws teach people how to behave. Religious doctrines teach people what to believe. But stories appeal to the imagination, to that place within us where reality and our true selves reside. Now, there are three stories that are at the heart of our Christian faith, and each of these stories shapes our religious life in a particular way. Two of these stories are based in the history of ancient Israel, the religion Jesus wanted to reform, and the third story is grounded in the genius of Jewish ritual, which we will enact in a few moments. Now, you can see each of these stories reflected in our lectionary readings today. I want to mention each briefly and say how I think each of these stories contributes to our new life and a day without fear. The first, of course, is the Exodus story. It's the most important story the Jewish people knew. It shaped their identity. It gave them a sense of who they were. It gave them their understanding of God. Parents were obligated to tell the story to their children generation after generation, and we know it as the story of the Passover. We celebrate it in a major way every Good Friday, and we celebrate it the first Sunday of every month, as we will today when we gather around the Eucharist table. It's a story not just about the past, but also about the human condition and about God's relationship to us in all times. The Exodus story is a story about bondage. It's a story about liberation. It's a story about a journey. It's a story about a destination. It begins with the Hebrews as slaves in Egypt. Their lives are marked by a politics of oppression, an economics of affluence, and a religion of division. That sound familiar to you? The story develops after some dramatic twists and turns toward the Exodus itself. The word Exodus means way out. And of course, the Exodus wasn't the end of the story. The Exodus merely set them on a journey that lasted for 40 years of wilderness wandering. But they were headed toward the promised land. And the story resonates with every telling because we ourselves are in bondage. Our bondage is political, cultural, psychological, spiritual. If I were to ask you, which I'm doing, what are you in bondage to? Your answer, like mine, would be many things. I am, for example, so grateful for the many things, the services, the information that my so-called smartphone delivers to me. At the same time, I want to scream in fury and frustration at it because so many people in my presence are not able to be present because they are present to or being distracted by the device in their hand and not present to the presence that is in front of them, which is me. It's infuriating, it's insulting, it's rude. We're in bondage to the messages our culture gives us about success, how we should look, about what the good life is. We're in bondage to voices about us from our own past. We're in bondage to the various addictions that each of us has. And the Pharaoh who holds us in bondage is both inside and outside us as well. And if the problem is bondage, then the solution is liberation. It's our desire for a day without fear. But notice in the Jesus story, the liberation begins at night. A light shines in the darkness. Jesus was born at night. Liberation means leaving what we know, passing through a sea of one kind or another, and coming out from under the lordship of Pharaoh, the lordship of the culture, into the affirmation that Jesus is Lord. It is not an easy journey. He never said it would be. It is a paradoxical journey because it's a journey toward the God who is also always with us and within us. The second story that is at the heart of our faith is that of the exile and return, the bondage exile story. And this is also grounded in history. Sometime near the end of the 6th century, Jerusalem, a place thought to be impregnable and that would last forever, was conquered and destroyed. The most heart-wrenching devastation was the destruction of the temple. Many Jews were slaughtered, and those who survived were marched off into exile some 800 miles away, where they lived as refugees. They were separated from their homeland. They lived under conditions of oppression. And next to the Exodus, this is the most important story in Jewish history. And it became a metaphor for our relationship with God as well. We live in a time in which millions of people know what it's like to be exiles, to be refugees. I pray every day for the people of Ukraine. I cannot imagine what it would be like if less than a mile from here, daily bombardments fell on our famed medical center, especially on Texas Children's Hospital, or if this historic museum district, including this church, were gone. I see photos of young families, a dad, a mom, 3 or 4 children, fleeing from the violence of drug cartel-run towns in Central America and Mexico. All they want is what all of us want: safety, to enjoy their family, a decent evening meal, a safe and good night's sleep, to have a shot of the future, a new life and a day without fear. I'm not positive, but I think were I in their place, I'd be on the run too, hoping, praying for safety and justice at the end of the journey, praying that some kind soul would take me in while I had a chance to get my feet on the ground. A life in exile means being separated from what is near and dear to you, and it usually means that you're powerless, that you're victimized. And we know this experience. Perhaps not outwardly, but we know it psychologically and we know it spiritually. That's why it resonates with us so deeply that on every Sunday in Advent, we begin the service by singing, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile there. That's our story. There is the feeling of longing for home, that runs deep within each of us. There's nothing romantic about the Christmas story. It's a story about life as it is for the vast majority of this world's population. Jesus was born on the street, so to speak. He had nothing in the way of rights or security, not even a home. As a grown man, he said, I have nothing. I am nowhere at home. Even at night, I have no place to lay my head. And he comes to us and says, come close to me. Stay close to me. I want you to mirror God's image, God's love, God's compassion. Pay attention, open your eyes and ears. I'm going to show you how to do it. Listen, use your eyes to see what truly is. All around you is not hell. All around you is a world waiting to be filled with hope and peace and joy. Christmas is not just about Jesus being born some 2,000 years ago. That makes and keeps it sentimental, which distorts our capacities for compassion and healing. As Meister Eckhart, the 14th century mystic who has experienced a resurgence of popularity in the last dozen years or so, put it in his Christmas sermon, what good is it to me if Mary gave birth to Christ 1,400 years ago and I do not do the same? What good indeed. Now, the third story we can use to understand and access what a Christian understanding of a new life in a day without fear is what I call the grace story. And you can see it in the epistle selection for today. Paul clearly states at the outset, this is a mystery. So, if in the few words I'm going to give to it right now, I make it clear, I've messed it up. It's a mystery. Just remember that a mystery is not that which is not understandable. A mystery is that which is endlessly understandable. And this mystery talks about how we're made right with God, with our true selves, through the gift of God. This is what Paul is talking about, and it is grounded in the Jewish genius for liturgical ritual. And the theological code word for this mystery is grace. Now again, grace is very paradoxical. Grace is something we don't deserve, we don't earn, we can't work for it, but we do have to do the work to have open eyes and ears. My favorite Zen teaching story about this is the aspiring young spiritual seeker who, after days of meditation training, goes to his teacher and expresses his frustration and asks, is there anything I can do to become enlightened? And the teacher said, no. No more than there's anything you can do to make the sun come up in the morning. And the student in his exasperation says, then why are you making me do all these hard spiritual exercises? And the teacher says, so you'll be awake when the sun comes up. This mystery says, and this is what I believe Paul is trying to say, that the life and death and resurrection of Jesus didn't accomplish anything. They reveal something. They reveal what is, what has been, whatever will be true about what God is like. Now, who can say what God is like? Well, I could when I was 18. And then I went to seminary and I got really good about it. I could rattle off things that attribute to God like a first grader could rattle off the alphabet. God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. God is 3 in 1, 1 in 3. God is holy. God is perfect. God is righteous. God is sovereign. And the list goes on and on. And as I've gotten older, my relationship to God has been one of unknowing. Even so, what I've learned from Jesus is that God is pure compassion, who invites us into compassionate lives and living. God is light, who invites us to come out of darkness into light. God is love, the love that accepts us just like we are. We are precious in God's sight. That's my favorite, absolute favorite line in Hebrew Scripture, and it also comes from Isaiah. I've learned from Jesus nothing stands between us and God. New beginnings are always possible. We need not be held in bondage by any burden from our past. If we hear it correctly, we are all gifted with new life and with no reason to fear. Happy New Year.